welcome back to End Times Prophecy News Update. This is Carrie Geren Scoggins discussing the issue of the radical left having gone way too far. Recently, we've seen PBS fired an attorney because he was caught on camera stating that he wanted the children of Trump supporters to be sent to a political re-education camp, and was happy about the fact that coronavirus was spreading throughout the South, wanting Trump supporters and the Southern Christians to die. We've also heard the videos by Hillary Clinton stating that she thought that the Republicans should be sent to what she referred to as fun camps, where they would be, quote, forced to sit down and listen to an opposing political viewpoint. And the key word in that sentence is forced. Today we're looking at some of the recent prophecies about this issue, from major ministers to ministers such as myself, prophetic dreams, prophecies, and visions of a coming end times system that includes political re-education camps. And this is not coming from the radical left. This is coming from major Democratic Party members such as Hillary Clinton, one that was picked for the Democratic Party nomination to run against Trump as president, and coming from attorneys hired on by PBS. These are major members of the political party, the Democratic Party. This is not considered wild radical left any longer to believe that it's okay to put conservatives, Republicans, religious right Republicans, Christians, gun owners, anyone that doesn't fit into the liberal Democratic Party platform, into a political re-education camp. The prophetic dreams are coming to pass. It's no longer talk behind closed doors among the Democratic Party leadership. I would like to open this webcast with stories of prophetic dreams and prophecies of those around us, my family and I. Starting with my ex-husband. 22 years ago, when he was holding my daughter back while we were still married, 22 years ago, she was an infant. And he was talking to her like fathers do and said, "Keep God's commandments. The sooner you know that, the better off you'll be. Never break the law unless they make the Bible illegal." I had thought of this years later, and I felt the Lord heard me when I was talking about it. That night I dreamed Jesus took me inside of a concrete building, and I saw my husband laying on a ex-husband laying on a gurney, and he had been put to death. And in the dream, Jesus looked at me and said, "He's going to break the law." And I remembered what he was talking about. They're going to make the Bible illegal at some point. Another story of prophetic dreams around my family is one of my own. I dreamed I was sitting at a table in a restaurant with a family member, and she had other people with her. After waking up, I had discerned that it was informants, and they were recording me. In the dream, the individual that turns me into the state said that I was speaking against Islam, and they were calling in the police. I had spoken against Islam, and the other person backed her up. They would not let me leave until the police get there. Apparently, it was illegal at that point to speak against Islam. Now, they did overturn the hate speech law in the federal Supreme Court. I had this dream after the hate speech law had been overturned in the Phelps ruling in the federal Supreme Court, upholding our legal right to debate Islam, homosexuality, abortion, and any issue from a biblical viewpoint, and our legal right to debate other religions. So it wasn't illegal to speak against Islam. And in the dream, it was sometime in the future. I also had another dream that the persecution of Christians had begun. The officers in the dream were wearing glasses that they could access their computer keypad with. I had this dream about 25 years ago. Later, this product came out on the market, and it was referred to as Google Glass. However, the police officers are not wearing Google glasses as of yet. But they did come out on the market. And I had this prophetic dream before that happened. I'm glad they're not already out on the shelves for the average citizen to buy. But they have stated that soon there will be. And of course, in the dream, the officers that were wearing Google Glass, the glasses that would help them access their keypad as they were standing there talking to me in the dream, were there to arrest Christians. The persecution of the Christians had begun. There was a woman from the Pentecostal church in Nashville who told me that their church had received a prophetic word. He said, I would not have you ignorant. I would not have my people ignorant. The system that was set up for the Miranda alerts will someday be used against the Christians. There's been other prophetic words and dreams about the coming persecution of the Christian church inside the United States, as well as other countries. It will be global. Around 15 years ago, I had a prophetic dream where Jesus spoke to me in the dream and said not to worry for what to say in that hour, for he would give me what to say in that hour. And as I woke up, I fully understood what that dream meant. That was a scripture on the end times. Some will be incarcerated, put in prisons, and some of them will be put to death. And in the scriptures he says not to worry for what to say in that hour. I will give you what to say in that hour. My brother, Paul Jason Geren, had a similar dream. Jesus told him he's going to give him a rock with a new name on it, and a robe made of linen with a new name in it, I believe it was. Just as the book of Revelation says about those that will come through the tribulation period. My generation, the Xers, may very well see the end times. When I think of these prophetic dreams, and when other people tell me of the dreams they've had of the coming persecution and what's going to happen to them, the being warned ahead of time, it reminded me of the story of one of the apostles that God said one day they would take him to a place he would not, and sure enough, he was executed for being Christian, like all the apostles were. In the prophetic dream I had concerning my ex-husband being put to death in the end times, and again I had been discussing earlier that he had told my daughter 20-something years ago that, as a baby, never to break the law unless they make the Bible illegal. And in the dream, that's what Jesus was referring to. He was laying on a gurney, and Jesus said he's going to break the law. After this transpires in the dream, I was still dreaming. I seen another family member looking on and seeing this and saying, I'm sure not going to do what he did. And it makes me fear for the younger generation. Their parents are not getting them ready for the coming persecution. A lot of them were not raised in church. Their parents weren't. They're 5 or 6 generations away from a real Christian upbringing and a Christian family, Christian background, and being biblically literate. They're generations away from Christian America, and they act like it. That's the generation that needs to be brought back into the church, taught the Word of God, and warned ahead of time what is coming, that they may be gearing themselves up for it. Those that follow me know I don't believe in a rapture. And I've got so many of these stories of people telling me of their prophetic dreams that they're going to be here. Just like in my prophetic dream, that I'm going to be here. And the same with my brother. And these are ministers. If they have to be so squeaky clean to go flying out of here in this so-called rapture, there's not going to be very many of them, because there's been plenty of ministers have told me they've had the same prophetic dreams similar to my own, that they're going to be here facing the beast system as well. The scripture says that the great snatching away does not come until the last trump. The last trump is at the end of the book of Revelation. It's not in the beginning. Most ministers bring up that the 7 letters to the 7 churches in the early part of the book of Revelation is the last the church is mentioned, as the scriptures begin to talk about the Antichrist system. It may not be for the reason that they've hoped for, that there was going to be a rapture and they'd all go flying out of here and no one would have to face persecution. Granted, in the 7 letters to the 7 churches, there's one church that God is going to keep from the hour of temptation. I'm not so sure that's the churches in America. I've heard so many ministers tell me they've dreamed the same thing I have, and their children are now coming and telling me these stories of what they've dreamed they're going to suffer one day. And it made me think that I should put out a video on our own prophetic dreams. Understand, this is widespread. It's certainly not just us. Moving on, I wanted to cover my dreams specifically about concentration camps, because I've had several. And I had these dreams before the issue cropped up. Before we heard Hillary Clinton saying she wanted to send the Republicans to fun camps and to force them to sit down and listen to an opposing viewpoint. Before PBS fired an attorney for saying he wanted Trump supporters' children to be put in a political re-education camp. Okay, I'll cover the first one. I dreamed that I was sent to a place that looked more like a school from the outside. Concrete block building. And the people that worked there were just regular employees. It wasn't military. But we were being held there captive. We could not leave. We had to sleep on the floor, on a concrete floor. And it was a whole room packed full of women sleeping on the floor. When we took showers, we didn't get a towel. We were forced to stay out and work a 2-acre lot apiece. Every one of us had a 2-acre lot that we had to hoe and take care of. And we had to stay so many months in this camp. It was no retreat. We were put there and we were made to work like slaves and treated like it. We were supposed to learn to appreciate the state. And if we didn't accept their political agenda, later we would be sent to a second camp. In the dream, I was talking to a lady that worked there, and she was friendly to me, and I said, is there any way that we could get a towel to dry off after our showers? And she said, we've got a blanket here the Christians made while they were here. So apparently in the dream, it was going to go in phases like it did in Nazi Germany. And they bring them in all at one time, all one group. All the Christians had already been through the camp. And I was one of the last stragglers to come through. And it was probably, in reality, would be that I was used to being stalked down by Democrat government informants trying to record me, because I was one of the first ones attacked by them. As soon as the End Times Beast system was forming, they came after me first. I knew what was going on. And it even reflected that in the dream. They got the other Christians first because they weren't expecting informants to show up at their church and start recording them. I knew they were going to break the law. They've already been doing it. They've ignored the biblical core values ruling. They've ignored the 1964 Civil Rights Act giving religion protected class status. They've ignored the legal right to proselytize a full uncensored Bible, federal Supreme Court ruling. They've ignored the fact that they've overturned the hate speech law in the Phelps ruling and upheld our legal right to debate homosexuality, abortion, Islam, and any issue from a biblical viewpoint, which also includes our legal right to debate transgender and this multiple genders false teaching called fluidity. Our legal right to debate the issues upheld when the hate speech law was overturned in the federal Supreme Court in the Phelps ruling. There is no freedom from religion. If they're already violating my Christian civil rights, what's it going to be in 20 years? Okay, back to the dream. I was in a concentration camp. Only the first one is a political re-education camp. It wasn't called that in my dream, but I understood if I did not accept their ideology, that I would be sent to a second camp. That was a death camp. And of course, in the dream, I don't accept their liberal Democrat, socialist, communist agenda. I would not. And I would not give up my Bible. I jokingly said they'd have to pry my Bible out of my cold, dead fingers. As I've often heard years ago, the old adage to take up their guns, they'd have to pry them out of their cold, dead fingers. Well, to take my Bible would be that way. And sure enough, in the dream, I'm sent on to the second concentration camp, the death camp. And that part of the dream, even the color of things changes. From bright colored and vivid to where it suddenly starts looking like the old footage of Nazi Germany. Almost in black and white. And the leader of the concentration camp there was a Muslim who looked exactly like Hitler's imam, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. Hitler turned over a third of his SS troops. The 13th Mountain Brigade, Waffen SS, was turned over to Hitler's Muslim imam, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. You can find a lot of information on it if you Google Hajj Amin al-Husseini, or the Nazis allowing Muslims to run the concentration camps. In the dream, the person running the camp looked just like him, even had on the same coat. And everyone hid when they saw him, in complete fear. That was the death camp. It was out on an island, and nobody knew where it was. I've had other dreams, similar. And here goes the one I haven't told very often. I had been off the internet for quite some time. I'd lived in East Tennessee, and we didn't have internet access out where I lived because they didn't have cable modem out there yet. It was that far out in the country. But it's been since around, I think it was around 2002 or 2003. I dreamed that I saw the FEMA camps, and I was on the inside of one as a prisoner, and the guard had come to get me, and she looked like somebody that would be a lesbian activist, only in a military suit. She wasn't hateful to me, but she wasn't overly friendly. She just did her job. She come and got me. I was stripped down naked. I was put on something that my feet were mounted up into stirrups, and I was to be carried around on a track, upside down, naked. I would receive a shot in the hip. They'd put my feet in the stirrups. I would be rung around on a track and carried into a furnace. And I found out later on, when I finally get back online, all these FEMA camp videos. That's why I looked it up. I had already dreamed it, that it was coming. And sure enough, I found that they have a room-size incinerator in these FEMA camps. A room-size incinerator. And in the dream, that's what I was carted around into one, with my feet hanging up in a stirrup. They'd stripped my clothes off, shot me in the hip with some type of injection, and I was being carted around on that track, straight into an incinerator. That's how I would die. It doesn't seem to shock the big Democrats that we hear discussing the global reset, which is just another new term for the New World Order, discussing global communism, that they're out in the open with their agenda now, openly discussing taking the right to private property, taking the right of inheritance, moving into a cashless system where they're going to expect microchipping to be the new money system, a cashless system where, quote, all funds are transferred electronically, and open about political re-education camps for those that do not follow along with their agenda. In other words, anybody that's not following the radical left, if you don't support big socialism to the level of that of Nazi Germany, Germany's National Socialist Party that Hitler brought in, big National Socialism, or just out-and-out communism, then they want them in a political re-education camp. This year of 2021, there's been more talk of it since that global reset that I've ever heard put out on the table by Democrats, out openly in the public, and not just by Antifa, but these are major Democratic Party political leaders who are entertaining the idea. 10 years ago, they just wouldn't admit to it publicly. Now they're out in the open with this. It was on the page for the Global Reset online. That said, I began watching those videos on FEMA camps. Just why is it that our government spent, I would say, trillions building these military-style concentration camps here inside the United States? They did not decommission them. They're still running and just waiting on the chance to use them. There's been a plethora of excuses as to why the money was spent. Mass arrests due to gun confiscation. And I would say that would probably be more accurate had it been that they were expecting mass arrests due to Bible censorship. If there comes mass arrests, it probably will not be because of gun confiscation. It will be just like it was in Nazi Germany. The mass arrests that led to the concentration camps started over religious censorship. And I've said this many times in my webcasts. The Nazi Good Speak law criminalized religious literature stating homosexuality was a sin. The new all-gay regiment in the Nazi military called the all-gay Nazi brown shirts. The brown shirts went house to house search and seizure, taking up the Bibles and Torahs at the Bible burnings. Those that did not give up their Bible or Torah to be burned in the street was arrested for violating the Nazi Good Speak law. And there was such mass arrests that they had to build camps to house all of them. Or at least that was the excuse. I feel it was the same with our current situation in the United States and the FEMA camps. It was for when they brought in religious censorship. That many people would rebel. More than they ever dreamed, you can bet. FEMA camps were built, according to some in the state, for mass arrests due to protests. And some might think that this would be a good spot to interject the prophecy that I had mentioned by Perry Stone and Shane Warren. They have a video out online. Perry Stone interviews a pastor named Shane Warren who tells a prophetic dream of the fault line between the North and the South going off and rioting. Just complete turmoil. And this was also said by another Christian prophet who died long before Black Lives Matter began. The pastor that founded Teen Challenge, David Wilkerson. David Wilkerson has a prophecy out online, or did have, before he passed away, a recording of him stating his prophetic dream that it would start as protests, and he named the city where George Floyd died and said it would begin there in the Northeast. And like I said, he died long before Ferguson or Black Lives Matter began. He named that very specific town George Floyd would be killed by the police officers with their knee on his neck at, and said the protests would begin there. And after an economic collapse, it would turn into a race war. People would be driving out of the cities, out of the north, down the interstates, pulling off on the side of the interstate, trying to get down into the fields to find a safe place away from the violence. And some in my family have had dreams of just a lot of violence in the inner city, people just shooting. Now, that could mean that the law enforcement is going to kill another African American, and at the rate it's going, it doesn't look like they've stopped some of the numbers of this. The out-of-hand abuse of a public office, the not prosecuting the officers for killing people, especially African American males. It may continue on to the point that All it needs is an extra catalyst like an economic collapse to cause it to go off like a volcano. It's so volatile. Already, here in the United States, there seem to be some, what people believe to be at least, legitimate excuses for FEMA camps, that there may be so many mass numbers of people arrested that there's no police department could house the thousands and thousands that would be arrested in one night. Perry Stone's prophecy was that they would burn New York City to the ground. They burnt Ferguson. How many people get arrested in a mass arrest? In my personal opinion, there's never an excuse to build concentration camps, especially for political protesters. Especially when it's the state's fault. They wouldn't be out there protesting if their rights weren't being violated. What's the old saying in the country churches? Can I get an amen? They wouldn't be out there protesting if they were happy and their civil rights weren't being violated. The last thing that our government needs to do is open concentration camps to put them in it whenever they do have mass arrests. Again, I think it's just a front and an excuse. The original intent was because they knew there would be mass arrest when they brought in political and religious censorship of religious right Republicans, Bible censorship, censoring the conservatives and particularly the Christians. There's no group more hated in the United States right now than the religious right Republicans. There's no group more mocked and made fun of. There's no group that has their rights violated to the level of the religious right Republicans, and yet you hear the least from them due to censorship. The only people that couldn't imagine concentration camps in Nazi Germany were the people that were not under persecution. The Jews saw it coming because they had to live in the discrimination day in and day out, just like the Christians here in the United States are having to live in it. If they're not Christian, they don't understand. It's not happening to them, so they don't see it. And they think it's all a wild conspiracy theory, and they will till they walk the Christians right in the camps right in front of them. That's called sticking your head in the sand. They don't believe it because the persecution is not happening to them. They're like a horse with those blinders on. They only see straight forward. They don't see what's going on around them. And that's on purpose. I wanted to cover the FEMA camps and what was the excuse that they may have been built for situations of a mass pandemic. Now, why would you need a criminal facility for a pandemic? They did bring in the FEMA coffins, those you see going across the screen in front of you. Millions of coffins at every FEMA camp in the United States. FEMA coffins were large indestructible containers made for a mass cheap burial site. They're stackable. They were made to stack one upon the other one in mass graves. And they hold up to 4 bodies each. Whoever is buried in these FEMA coffins is not going to have a respectable burial. Like I said, they were made for mass grave sites because they're made to stack one upon the other. I mean, we see them in the, like I said, the pictures are coming across your screen where you can see millions of them are stacked together and they're made stackable when they're empty. But they're also made to stack when they're full and the lid to the coffin is shut. They still stack one on top of the other. They're made for mass grave sites. And the fact that they hold up to 4 bodies each shows that this is for a mass burial. This is not going to be for an individual. This is for 4 people killed at a time or more. They sent millions of these FEMA coffins to every FEMA camp across the nation and stockpiled them. Let that sink down into your ears, that your federal government has already paid out billions preparing for mass graves in a military style facility. They're not stacked up at a hospital facility or a situation where someone would think they would be sent during a pandemic. No, they were sent to prison camps. The American version of the Nazi concentration camp is a FEMA camp. It's not set up for sick people in a pandemic. It was set up for mass arrest, like they said. And then they stockpiled these facilities full of millions of FEMA coffins. Nothing says a death camp like stockpiling millions of coffins that are stackable and hold more than 1 body each. Something our mainstream Democrat media will never tell to the American public. Glenn Beck of The Blaze did an investigation into the FEMA camp stories in hopes of refuting it. In hearing the Democrats claim, oh, it's all conspiracy theories, they're right-wing radical nuts. Glenn Beck said he could not refute it. The more information that he had gathered, the worse it looked. That indeed we have concentration camps sitting in America in every single state. They're just not using them yet. At some point in time, individuals behind closed doors inside the United States government had big plans for what appears to be the coming end time scenario. Back during the 80s and 90s, there was out in the open racist talk that some in our government feared racial minorities rioting. And then came the LA riots. These FEMA camps have been sitting there operational since that time. It was a racist motivation. And now you see Democrats, again, Hillary Clinton, discussing fun camps. Send the Republicans to fun camps. Force them to sit down and hear an opposing viewpoint. In other words, force the Republicans into a political re-education camp and force them to hear their Democrat rhetoric day and night until they either submit or die. Totalitarianism. It hasn't changed since communist Russia and the gulags. Revisionist history has changed the perspective that our youth has. They no longer know or have knowledge of what really went on in communist Russia or Nazi Germany. I've recently had young people write in and tell me that they don't believe Nazi Germany was socialist. I said that was the name of the party, National Socialist Party. Hitler ran on the campaign trail, pushing what he called National Socialism and giving out books by Karl Marx. They don't know about the gulags in communist Russia, the 400 million people put in political re-education camps and death camps because they dare spoke out against communism. The one-liner that we heard spread by Democrats all over the liberal universities was, quote, "Oh, communism in its truest form is good." Really? 400 million in a death camp called a gulag in communist Russia because you spoke out against the state. That's communism in its truest form. It's called totalitarianism, where no other viewpoint is accepted other than that of the bourgeoisie, the rich, the powerful, those in control, and everyone else is a peasant owned by the state. And just as we see in the revisionist history, which was done under the guise of multiculturalism, that we're not to speak against the government of a communist country because we're supposed to accept other cultures. Ignore what Castro did in Cuba under the communism. And sure enough, you see that same age group that never heard the truth speaking out in support of communism, sympathy for Castro, calling him a great leader, and that's the generation that never heard the truth due to revisionist history and censorship because of multiculturalism. Our schools have caused this, and that will be the generation that runs the concentration camps and brings in the anti-Christian agenda. They're going to run the end times beast system, and it's going to be because they're ignorant. It's going to be because my age group, the Xers, who stepped in and took those teaching positions in the schools, were big liberal Democrats who would not tell them the truth. Communism in its truest form is not good. That is another liberal lie, a liberal one-liner of propaganda. The fact of the matter is it was 400 million dead in a concentration camp called a gulag in communist Russia. You never hear the youth talk about reading books by Ayn Rand, or the books that my generation read, like George Orwell's 1984. What we're living in right now sounds exactly like it's straight off the pages of George Orwell's 1984. When he wrote that book, he said he wrote it out of observations that were through his daily life. Don't trust anyone under 30. They're all informants for the state. They'll turn you in. He lived in a police state. Sound familiar? When your kids come home trying to get you to say homosexuality is a sin because they think they're going to get them to arrest you and they're going to get a kickback, they're going to get paid an informant check to get their parents arrested for saying homosexuality is a sin, even though the hate speech law has already been overturned in the federal Supreme Court? Does it sound like 1984, George Orwell? Just how many FEMA camps were built? That they were in every state. Going across your screen, you will see a map showing how many FEMA camps were in the United States, in various states at that time. In the late 1990s, there was FEMA camps in every state, and the number was growing. As people began to get this information out on the web, in came the censorship. That was the first topic censored by the Democrats in federal offices. And when they saw they were getting by with using social media to censor out what they didn't want heard, that Snowden exposed, because they did not prosecute those crooked NSA Democrats that Snowden exposed, they kept doing it. Trump blamed Big Tech. Big Tech just did what the crooked FBI officers and NSA officers that were big Democrat gay activists came in there and pushed their weight around, forcing them to do. Censorship. Censor out what they don't want heard. These FEMA camps are built to house mass numbers of people. When they say mass arrest, they're talking 30,000. They said the FEMA camp in Alaska was built for several 100,000. and that they thought they could hold in facilities up to 1 million people, just in Alaska. I tell you what, that fact alone should raise an eyebrow, because it shows the fact that they're wanting to house that many people in Alaska due to mass arrests. That's almost the whole population there. If the FEMA camps were only there for a pandemic, you wouldn't see them built to hold larger numbers in areas where there are fewer people. The most rural areas have camps built to hold far more people than that outside of the large cities. I think it's because they intended to incarcerate more of the country people. They wanted to go after the country Christians, the southern gun owners, the Alaskan hunters. They don't fit into the Democrat communist regime. They don't want people like that in their new America. And they intend to get rid of them the old-fashioned way. A political re-education camp, and if they don't change, send them on to the death camp. The Army put out a manual on how to run a political re-education camp. Going across your screen, you see an article that I was sharing concerning what the Army states when faced and confronted with having distributed booklets on how to run a political re-education camp. And that the Army admits re-education camp manual was not intended for public release. And yet the public finds out that the Army is putting out manuals on how to control, run, and operate a fully functional political re-education camp. Outlines the implementation of re-education camps. Of course, they did not intend this for public release. They did not want the American public to know that the military was being geared up to run a political re-education camp. Most of the FEMA camp videos that were out on YouTube exposing articles found concerning FEMA camps and situations such as this, where the Army's been faced with giving out manuals on how to run a political re-education camp. Our tax dollars at work put out a manual on how to run a concentration camp. And ads that people had found of FEMA hiring people on to run the camps. This information was censored off of the web. Democrats in big federal offices got in there and called it filtering it off the web. It was political censorship. They didn't want to expose what they were planning. And because they got by with it, they kept doing it. And then they moved on to just censoring all Republicans. But it started with censorship of discussion on those FEMA camps. That Edward Snowden was talking about. I have 3 videos out already online on the NDAA and FEMA camps. It was worth a mention since the NDAA came back up before Congress already here in 2021. Wanting more funding? Notice that they did not mention what all the indefinite detainment encompassed. Indefinite detainment, or NDAA, meant that they would be able to incarcerate someone up for life without ever having made an arrest and that the individual taken by the NDAA, or indefinite detainment, would not be able to get an attorney. They would never see a judge or a court. They're just indefinitely detaining them without ever having a court hearing, never actually being found guilty of a crime because they were never arrested and they were never tried. Violates the 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Obama signed the indefinite detention bill into law. The ACLU contested it. It goes to the federal Supreme Court, and it's not shot down. They were asking for more funds for the NDAA and indefinite detainment this year of 2021. Let that sink down into your ear. That the NDAA and indefinite detainment meant that the government was going to be able to detain someone for life without ever seeing an attorney, without getting to go before a judge, without having a jury, totally outside of what our constitutional due process of law requires. There's no Miranda rights read because you're never arrested. You're just grabbed and stuck into a concentration camp for life. This is the mentality of the left. The very bill Obama signed into law, they're asking for more money now to expand it and expand the usage. That should scare anyone. Do your research on the NDAA and indefinite detainment and get politically active and speak out. This is liberal Democrat at work. Bypassed the need for an arrest or to be actually charged with a crime. Deny them the right to an attorney and a trial by jury of one's peers. There's no sentencing because they've never been arrested and tried. They're there for life on a whim of some big military Democrat or somebody in law enforcement who just don't like them. Some big government official that don't like them. A dictatorship. Not that you should see in a constitutional republic. This is not due process of law, and it's not justifiable. If there's ever a reason to justify detaining somebody, it's to be established in a court of law. Christians are going to have to get politically active. I've said this so many times. And yet I see Christians, because most of them have big families, they've got jobs, they don't have time to get on the phone with their congressman and start asking about the legislation going through and speaking their opinion. They're a taxpayer. Their views are to be heard by their representative. That's what that representative is there for. Get politically active and speak out. Times are going to get hard soon, and you need to teach your children that the public school did not. Revisionist history has caused them to believe socialism and communism is on their side, that it's a positive thing. The young people were never told when the hate speech law was overturned that it was unconstitutional to censor Christians or censor the Bible on issues such as homosexuality, and that the federal Supreme Court overturned the law in the Phelps ruling. This younger generation was not taught the American values we were. They don't fear the idea of putting people into a political re-education camp that will not conform to the liberal Democrat views, because they're not being taught freedom straight across the board for every different viewpoint. Not just freedom for those that support the Democratic Party platform. The FEMA videos that were out online and the censorship when it began in the early 2000s, and now it's censorship of any conservative ideal. They don't want the children to hear that homosexuality is a sin. They want complete religious censorship. the liberal Democrat teachers' unions have caused our kids to believe that religious censorship, even on the scale of Nazi Germany's, the Nazi Good Speak Law, censoring all scripture stating that homosexuality is a sin, that this is acceptable. I'll leave you with the photo you see going across your screen. When someone was looking through old photos of Nazi Germany, they found a picture of this one man who's standing in a crowd of Nazis sig heiling. He's the only one there who refuses to sig heil. That one man represents me and millions of other Christians. Pass that on to your children. Not to just go with the flow, accept any ideal that the liberal Democrats are espousing. Even the Democrats themselves used to use a term back in the 90s, question authority. It was on their bumper stickers. You notice they're not teaching that now. Now that they're in authority, they don't want anyone to question the liberal Democrat agenda. Question authority. Question the Democrats. Question their motives. I really hated to see Trump's work in getting the teachings by our founding fathers back in the public schools. Veering away from what our founding fathers supported was detrimental, and we've created several decades of socialists that do not understand our constitutional republic and why our laws are written the way that they are. That's going to be the generation to rise up and put the Christians to death. An ignorant generation. A generation that will fall for anything because they were not taught biblical truths. They were not taught what our founding fathers said. And therefore they do not support the freedom. The freedom straight across the board that Americans have enjoyed. They were taught freedom for the gay activists, but not freedom for the Christians. Never freedom straight across the board, only freedom for the liberal Democrats and the people that support their agenda. The one that needs the political re-education is the youth coming out of the public schools. The Christians really need to get politically active and start speaking out and making sure that the youth hear what the Christians of my generation have to say. Make sure that the Republicans aren't censored in your area. Call your representatives. Get active at the school meetings. Get politically active. There is no freedom from religion. Stand up for your Christian civil rights and teach your children to. This has been another End Times Prophecy News Update. Carrie Geren Scoggins, bringing you more food for thought. Thank you for listening.